When we think of survival, we often imagine physical struggles, such as wars, natural disasters, or serious illnesses. However, Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, offers us a radically different perspective. For him, the search for meaning is the key to surviving even in the most difficult times. And it is precisely in this search that we find love as a form of survival. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl recounts his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps, where he witnessed human degradation in its rawest form. Yet even in the midst of this barbarity, he found a glimmer of hope. He realized that even when everything was taken from them, prisoners still had a choice in how to respond to their circumstances. And it was in that choice that Frankl found meaning. He saw that even in suffering, people could find purpose, a reason to carry on. But how is this possible? How can we find meaning in the midst of suffering? Frankl argues that it is precisely in these moments that we are closest to discovering what truly matters. When everything is taken away from us, only the things that truly make sense are left. And that is where we can find love. Love not as a romantic feeling, but as a conscious choice to connect with others, to care about the well-being of others, to give of ourselves to others. This choice to love is what allows us to find meaning in the midst of suffering. It is what allows us to transform suffering into something more. It is what allows us to find a purpose greater than the suffering itself. And that is where we find survival. Not just physical survival, but spiritual survival. That is where we find the strength to carry on, even when all seems lost. But how can we cultivate this choice to love in our daily lives? How can we find meaning in the midst of suffering? Frankl suggests that we must begin to look within. We must begin to question what truly matters to us. We must begin to find the values that guide us. And that is where we can find love. That is where we can find the strength to carry on. That is where we can find survival. Viktor Frankl, a young Austrian psychiatrist, was at the height of his career when World War II broke out. In 1942, he and his family were deported to the Theresienstadt concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. Shortly thereafter, Frankl was transferred to the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland, where he witnessed the horror and brutality of the Nazi regime. During his time in Auschwitz, Frankl witnessed the loss of his wife, mother and father, all murdered at the hands of the Nazis. However, rather than giving in to despair and despondency, Frankl found a way to survive even in the midst of such terror and destruction. He observed that, despite everything, the prisoners who maintained a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives were the ones most likely to survive. Frankl noticed that prisoners who had a reason to live, a reason to endure, were able to overcome the hardships and suffering they faced. They found ways to keep hope alive, even when all hope seemed lost. Frankl also noted that prisoners who had lost faith in themselves and their ability to survive were the ones who most quickly succumbed to hopelessness and death. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl describes how he himself found purpose in the midst of suffering. He began to help other prisoners, sharing what little he had, listening to their stories, and offering advice. In doing so, Frankl discovered that even in the midst of such horror, he was still able to find a sense of purpose and meaning. He realized that even though he could not control the circumstances around him, he could still control his own attitude and response to those circumstances. Frankl's experience in the Holocaust led him to develop his theory of the search for meaning, which he called logotherapy. He argued that the search for meaning is the ultimate human motivation, and that even in the face of adversity and suffering, it is possible to find purpose and meaning in our lives. Frankl also argued that love and compassion were fundamental to survival, and that they were ultimately the most powerful form of resistance against oppression and destruction. Logotherapy, a therapeutic approach developed by Viktor Frankl, is often associated with the search for meaning and purpose in life. However, there is a fundamental aspect of logotherapy that is often overlooked: its intimate relationship with love. For Frankl, love is not just a pleasant feeling or an intense emotion, but rather a driving force that can inspire and give meaning to our existence. According to Frankl, love is a way of finding meaning in the midst of suffering and adversity. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl describes how, during his experience in Nazi concentration camps, he witnessed how love and compassion among prisoners gave them the strength and courage to continue fighting for their lives. For Frankl, love was not just a feeling, but a conscious choice to commit to others, even in the face of adversity. Logotherapy is based on the idea that meaning and purpose in life can be found in three ways: through work, experience, and suffering. However, it is love that provides the link between these three forms. When we choose to love, we are choosing to find meaning in our experiences, even if they are difficult or painful. Furthermore, love allows us to find purpose in the work we do because we know that we are doing something to benefit others. Frankl also highlighted the importance of love as a way to overcome pain and suffering. When we suffer a loss or face adversity, it is common to feel empty and meaningless. However, it is precisely in these moments that love can be a source of inspiration and strength. Love can give us the courage to face pain and find greater meaning in our experience. Furthermore, logotherapy emphasizes the importance of love as a form of transcendence. When we love, we are transcending our own ego and our individual needs. We are choosing to connect with others and find greater meaning in our existence. This does not mean that love is a way of escaping from our responsibilities or problems, but rather a way of finding deeper meaning in our lives. In short, Viktor Frankl's logotherapy teaches us that love is not just a pleasant feeling, but rather a conscious choice to find meaning and purpose in our lives. Love is a driving force that can inspire and give courage in the midst of suffering and adversity. By choosing to love, we are choosing to find meaning in our experiences, overcome pain, and find a greater purpose in our lives. When we think about survival, we often focus on our ability to overcome physical challenges. We might think of our ancestors who struggled to find food and shelter, or soldiers struggling to survive in war zones. However, Viktor Frankl reminds us that survival is about much more than just the physical. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl emphasizes that spiritual survival is key to our ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges. When we focus solely on our physical survival, we can lose sight of what motivates us and gives us purpose. It's easy to get caught up in a cycle of basic needs like food, water, and shelter, and forget that we are complex human beings with emotional and spiritual needs. Frankl argues that in a challenging environment, it's easy to lose track of ourselves and become just a number on a list of survivors. However, it's precisely in these moments that we need to find a reason to keep fighting, a reason that goes beyond mere physical survival. Spiritual survival, on the other hand, focuses on finding meaning and purpose in our lives. This doesn't mean that we ignore our physical needs, but rather that we put them into perspective. When we have a reason to keep fighting, a reason that gives us meaning and purpose, we are able to overcome obstacles that would otherwise be insurmountable. Frankl sees spiritual survival as a way of finding meaning even in the most difficult situations, and it is precisely this ability to find meaning that allows us to overcome adversity. In his book, Frankl recounts how prisoners who found a reason to keep fighting, whether for their loved ones or for a greater cause, were the ones who had the best chance of surviving concentration camps. He himself found meaning in his experience by helping other prisoners, which gave him the strength to keep fighting. This is not to say that physical survival is unimportant, but rather that spiritual survival is essential to our ability to overcome life's challenges. Ultimately, physical and spiritual survival are interconnected. When we find meaning and purpose in our lives, we are able to overcome obstacles that would otherwise be insurmountable. And it is precisely this ability to find meaning that allows us to survive not only physically, but also spiritually. When we think of survival, we often think of fighting for food, shelter, and safety. However, Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, discovered that love can be the greatest source of hope in difficult times. For Frankl, love was not just a romantic feeling or a fleeting emotion, but rather a fundamental force that can help us overcome life's most difficult challenges. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl describes how even in the concentration camps, he witnessed people who found ways to love and connect with others, even under extremely difficult conditions. He tells the story of a woman who, rather than give in to hopelessness, chose to care for an orphan child in the concentration camp. This choice, made in the midst of so much pain and suffering, gave her a reason to live and a sense of purpose. Frankl also observed that when people felt loved and appreciated, they were able to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. He noticed that prisoners who received letters from their family and friends were more likely to survive than those who were completely isolated. This is because love and connection with others give us a sense of belonging and meaning, which is essential to our emotional and psychological survival. Furthermore, Frankl discovered that love can also be a source of inspiration and motivation. When people feel loved and valued, they are more motivated to overcome challenges and strive to improve their situation. This can be seen in many examples of people who, inspired by the love of their family or friends, were able to overcome serious illness, personal loss, or other types of adversity. Therefore, love is not just a fleeting emotion, but rather a powerful force that can help us overcome life's most difficult challenges. In difficult times, love can be the source of hope that allows us to move forward, even when all seems lost. This is why Frankl insisted that love is one of the main forms of survival, as it provides us with the energy and motivation to keep fighting, even in the face of adversity. When we think of love, our minds often go straight to romantic love, which involves passion, attraction, and intimacy with someone. However, Viktor Frankl reminds us that there are other forms of love that are equally important and can be fundamental to our survival. One of these is unconditional love. Romantic love is often based on expectations, needs, and desires. We love someone because they make us feel a certain way, because they give us something we need, or because they complete us. This doesn't mean that romantic love is bad or selfish, but rather that it is conditioned by our own needs and desires. Unconditional love, on the other hand, is just the opposite. It is not based on expectations or needs, but rather on a conscious choice to love without judgment or condition. Unconditional love is the kind of love we can offer to someone regardless of their actions or characteristics. It is the love we can offer to a stranger, a friend, or a family member simply because they exist. It is a love that is not tied to results or a specific relationship, but rather to a choice to love without conditions. And it is precisely this choice that can give us the strength and motivation to overcome life's challenges. Frankl tells us that in the concentration camp, he saw people who found the strength to survive through their unconditional love for others. They loved their family members, their friends, or even their enemies, not because they were worthy of love, but because they chose to love. And it was this choice that helped them find meaning and purpose in a situation that seemed meaningless. Unconditional love is not easy to find, especially in a society that values romantic love and passion above all else. However, it is precisely this form of love that can give us the strength to overcome life's challenges. When we choose to love unconditionally, we are choosing to live according to our deepest values and find meaning in our lives, even in the midst of adversity. When we think of love, we usually associate it with happiness, joy, and pleasure. However, Viktor Frankl, one of the most prominent psychologists of the 20th century, presents us with a deeper and more complex vision of love. For him, love is not just a pleasant emotion, but a way of transcending pain and suffering. Through experiences of extreme adversity, such as the Holocaust, Frankl discovered that love can be a source of strength and resilience in the face of suffering. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he recounts how, even amid the indescribably horrific conditions of the concentration camp, prisoners who kept the flame of love alive in their hearts were able to find purpose and a reason to continue living. Love, in this sense, is not just an emotion, but a choice. It is the decision to remain committed to others, even when all logical reasons suggest that we should give up. It is the ability to find meaning in the midst of suffering, and to transform pain into something that makes us grow and become stronger. Frankl also pointed out that love does not necessarily have to be a romantic emotion. It can be love for a friend, a family member, or even an ideal. Any type of love that allows an individual to feel connected to something greater than themselves can be a source of strength and inspiration in times of adversity. Furthermore, love can be a form of transcendence from pain, because it allows an individual to distance themselves from their own suffering and focus on the well-being of others. When we are focused on helping others, our own pain becomes less relevant, and we can find a sense of purpose and meaning. However, it is important to note that love is not a magic solution to suffering. It is not a way to avoid or deny pain, but rather to face it head-on with courage and determination. It is the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity and to find a way to overcome it. In short, love, according to Viktor Frankl, is a way of transcending pain and suffering because it allows an individual to connect with something greater than themselves, find meaning in the midst of suffering, and remain steadfast in the face of adversity. It is a choice we can make every day, and it can give us the strength and courage needed to overcome any obstacle. When Viktor Frankl talks about love as a means of survival, he's not just talking about a romantic emotion or a fleeting feeling. He's talking about a conscious choice, an attitude that can be cultivated and developed in the midst of the most difficult circumstances. And this is where gratitude and appreciation come into play. You might ask yourself, what does gratitude have to do with love? The answer is everything. Gratitude is the fertile soil in which love can grow. When you feel grateful for someone or something, you begin to realize the value that person or thing has in your life. You begin to see things differently, to appreciate the little details that previously went unnoticed. And it is precisely this appreciation that makes you feel more connected to the people and things you love. It is gratitude that allows you to get closer to others, to feel closer to the one you love. But gratitude is not just an emotion. It is a choice. It is a decision you make every day to find the good in your life, to find the good in the person you love. And it is precisely this choice that makes love grow. When you choose to feel grateful, you begin to feel happier, more fulfilled, more complete. And it is precisely this feeling of completeness that makes you feel more connected to others, more loving. Furthermore, gratitude also has the power to transform the way you relate to others. When you feel grateful for someone, you begin to feel more generous, more willing to help, more willing to give. And it is precisely this willingness that makes relationships deeper and more meaningful. Gratitude is what makes you feel more connected to the other person, more committed to the other person. So, if you want to build a stronger, more lasting, truer love, start practicing gratitude. Start finding the good in your life, in your partner, in your friends. Start feeling grateful for everything you have, for everything you are. And it is precisely this gratitude that will make love grow, that will make you feel more connected to the other person, more fulfilled, happier. When Viktor Frankl talks about love as a way to find meaning in adversity, he's not referring to a romantic emotion or a fleeting feeling. He's referring to a force that can inspire us to find purpose in the midst of suffering. For Frankl, love is a form of resistance to despair, a way to transform pain into something deeper and more meaningful. Imagine yourself in a Nazi concentration camp, as Frankl was during World War II. Imagine the lack of freedom, hunger, cold, pain, and death surrounding you on all sides. It is in this environment that the most fundamental question arises: why continue? Why fight to live in a place where life seems to have no value? It was in this context that Frankl discovered that love can be a way to find meaning even in the most difficult situations. For Frankl, love is not just an emotion, but a choice. It is a decision to focus on what is essential, on what is truly important. It is choosing to focus on love even when everything around you seems to be against you. And it is this choice that can give meaning to life, even in the midst of adversity. One example of this is the story of a prisoner Frankl met in Auschwitz. This man had lost his wife and children, and had been taken to the concentration camp alone. Yet, even in the midst of pain and despair, he found a way to keep on living. He began to help other prisoners, to share what little he had, to offer words of comfort and support. And it was in this choice to love others that he found meaning, even in a place where life seemed to have no value. This story powerfully illustrates how love can be a way to find meaning in adversity. It's not a feel-good emotion, but a choice that gives us purpose. It's a way to transform pain into something deeper and more meaningful. It's a way to resist despair and find a reason to keep living, even when the odds seem stacked against you. In short, love as a way of finding meaning in adversity is a choice that allows us to transform pain into something deeper and more meaningful. It is a way of resisting despair and finding a reason to keep living, even when everything seems against you. It is a way of finding purpose in the midst of suffering, and it is this that can give us the strength to keep fighting, even when life seems to have no more value. When we think of survival, we often picture dramatic life or death scenarios, such as a dense forest or a barren desert. However, Viktor Frankl teaches us that survival is not just about physics, but also about finding meaning in the midst of suffering. And what's even more surprising is that love can be one of the most important tools for doing so. When we apply love as a means of survival in our daily lives, we're not just talking about a romantic emotion or a pleasant feeling. We're talking about a conscious choice to prioritize connection with others and with ourselves. This can manifest itself in many ways, such as performing small acts of kindness towards strangers or dedicating ourselves to a cause that's close to our hearts. In doing so, we're creating a web of meaning that connects us to the world around us and allows us to find purpose even in the most difficult times. A practical example of this is the practice of gratitude. When we are facing challenges, it is easy to focus on what is missing in our lives. However, by choosing to focus on what we have, we are creating a culture of love and appreciation that can completely transform our perspective. This does not mean that problems disappear, but rather that we are finding a way to deal with them that allows us to grow and become stronger. Additionally, Love as a form of survival can also manifest itself in our closest relationships. Imagine that you are going through a difficult time with a friend or family member. Instead of shutting down or distancing yourself, you choose to reach out and listen with empathy. This can be an incredibly powerful act of love, as it shows that you value the connection with the other person, even when things are difficult. And it is precisely this connection that can give us the strength to keep fighting. Another way to apply love as a form of survival is by connecting with nature. When we're feeling lost or directionless, a walk in the woods or a moment of contemplation by the ocean can be incredibly restorative. This isn't just because nature is beautiful, but because it connects us to something bigger than ourselves. And it's this connection that can give us the sense of purpose and meaning we need to move forward. Finally, it is important to note that love as a means of survival is not a magic technique that solves all of our problems. It is a daily choice that requires practice and dedication. However, it is precisely this choice that can completely transform the way we live and face life's challenges. By applying love as a means of survival in our daily lives, we are creating a life that is richer, fuller, and more connected to the world around us. And so we find ourselves faced with a fundamental choice: to allow suffering to destroy us, or to find a way to transform it into an opportunity for growth. Viktor Frankl showed us that even in the midst of hell, love can be the light that guides us out of the darkness. Love is not just a romantic feeling, but a conscious choice to find meaning in adversity, to transcend pain, and to find hope in difficult times. It is a form of spiritual survival that allows us to find purpose in the midst of chaos. Frankl's Logotherapy teaches us that when we focus on finding meaning, we also find love. And it is this unconditional love that allows us to overcome obstacles and find the strength to move forward. So when life presents us with challenges, when suffering knocks on our door, let us remember that love is the answer. Love is the flame that lights the way. Love is the strength that makes us resist. Love is the reason why it is worth continuing. In a world filled with pain and suffering, let us choose love. Let us choose to find meaning in adversity. Let us choose to transcend pain and find hope. For it is only when we choose love that we can truly find the spiritual survival that allows us to live fully. And now, it's your turn to reflect on love as a form of survival. Leave a comment below telling us how love has been a source of strength and inspiration in your life. And if you like this content, subscribe to our channel to receive more inspiring and reflective videos. Also, share this video with someone you know who needs to hear this message. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.